what we're going to start with is kind of how we got here today, from an auction that surprised us on a key piece of land that we'd hoped to protect back last winter. And we had a month's warning. And so we're going to kind of take you through the timeline and relive history a little bit about how a lot of really good things came together out of that kind of emergency situation that emerged a year ago, really leading to some longer term partnerships. And so I'm going to be joined by Sandy Hollenberg from our Yellow Springs Credit Union, who actually played a key part in helping to connect financing plans for Community Solutions. Susan is going to talk a little bit about Community Solutions' decision to bid in this auction and what that's translated into for them. So I will go ahead and get us started here. And really be good if this works. Okay. Let's see. All right, back to that. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Good, the next slide.
Oh, it's not showing.
Yeah.
Showing.
You know what?
Slideshow.
Okay. All right. There we go. Oh, except it's not on there.
Why is it not showing? That's bizarre.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just go ahead and get going without the slides. Here we go. And we've got copies of the slides. And I think that if somebody could help get a hold of David Adkins, maybe. I don't know, Denny?
I'll do
Do
that.
you think you can do that? Okay, that'd be great. All right. So we try to get hooked up for this. The way that we usually preserve land at Tecumseh Land Trust is with conservation easements. We don't own land. We have chosen not to own land because we feel like we want to get a lot of land protected. Susan pointed out all the land that's going to be turning over in the United States, especially farmland. And so we feel like what we want to do is, first of all, just get basic assurance that the land is going to get preserved, be available for agriculture in the future, and also give us conservation benefits that we get from preserving riparian corridors and habitat. So mostly what we do, and we've been really successful at that, we've got about 158 easements right now that are recorded, that are completed. And they comprise over 26,000 acres. So Glen Helen Nature Preserve, 1,000 acres plus at this point, is really our biggest natural property that we preserve, but we don't own or manage the Glen. Antioch College owns the Glen, they manage it. They have a really very competent staff to staff their nature preserve. And we have a lot of great farmers that we work with, a lot of great landowners, some of whom rent their land. And so this model has really worked pretty well for us. And just to say, the slide that you can't see explains a little bit about what the difference is between the value of land before an easement goes on it and the value of land after an easement goes on it. And that's something that can be appraised by qualified appraisers. And in this area, it's someplace between $1,000 and $3,000 an acre, basically, that difference. And so through Clean Ohio program, it's been real helpful for us. Through the Ag Land Easement program that's out of the Farm Bill from USDA, and then through some other sources as well. We've worked with the Ohio EPA's Water Resource Restoration Sponsorship Program. We're able to put together funds to purchase conservation easements on whole properties. And so typically we look at a property that's got a lot of farming going on it, but also probably has some woods that have some protection on them. There is a limitation on impervious surface that's a part of almost all of our easements. And there's also a limit on subdivision, how often it can be subdivided. We have a bumper sticker, which I think is available at our table out in the lobby, that says asphalt is the last crop. And that's kind of our starting point, our byword. Not every farm has got a real sophisticated, organic operation or we got a lot of corn and soybeans growing in a lot of those fields, but they are going to be available for agriculture, whatever direction agriculture takes in the future. And also they will continue to provide us those natural resource benefits when they have water and the benefits of trees, which are just so huge. Landowners have choices. And part of what their bundle of sticks of landowner rights allows them to do is to sell and develop their land. There are some zoning restrictions that would affect that, various kinds of local government restrictions that might relate to what you can do with a particular piece of land, but you've got choices. And so one of those choices can be to tie up some of your development rights permanently with a conservation easement. The Arnovitz farm that went up for auction last February 16th, I think it was, with a month till the auction, March 16th, was one of those properties that we have long hoped to be able to protect in the area. It has a lot of the Jacoby Creek on it, and it had been a property that had been fairly hard to farm, particularly the western section of it. The Jacoby Creek had meandered initially, as most creeks and rivers do, wide floodway, in order to cultivate fields and to use modern equipment. We have over the years tended to channelize creeks, to build in drainage, to be able to farm more of the land. And so this is definitely a property that had a lot of work to try to achieve better drainage for agricultural purposes, but was still kind of difficult to farm, especially that western side of it. The family that owned it, the Arnovitzes, we had been in touch with one family member pretty consistently who had some real fondness of this property that his grandfather had bought, and he had actually, he was a businessman, did development business, Matt Arnovitz, and his very first business was selling watercress to Dayton hotels and restaurants off of this property. So he had some ideas about trying to preserve the stream, probably develop some of the land as well, but was not successful at really talking the rest of the family into doing that. And there were several decision makers who were heir to the land, and so they just were not able to reach consensus and decided we'll sell. They worked with an auction firm to sell the land in 9 pieces, 270 acres, and what they were doing is working with the Miami Township zoning code to figure out how could they get the most possible residence spots out of that land, given the road frontage that they had available and given the existing access that was available. So they came up with 9 different parcels that were to be surveyed if in fact they sold as those parcels. So bidders could come and they could bid on any of the individual parcels. They could bid on the whole area. They had any kind of combination of possibilities. And this method of auction, if you haven't ever been to one, there's sort of a big board that kind of shows you what the leading bid is on all the different parcels, and it moves rather quickly. And if you want to get the best price on the whole thing, you tend to need to buy the whole thing. And so it's definitely a way to get the seller the highest price that they're going to be able to get. Why was this property so important that we scrambled in a month? It has long been a part of the Jacoby Greenbelt. And there were several decision makers who were heir to the land. And so they just were not able to reach consensus and decided we'll sell. They worked with an auction firm to sell the land in 9 pieces, 270 acres. And what they were doing is working with the Miami Township zoning code to figure out how could they get the most possible residence spots out of that land, given the road frontage that they had available and given the existing access that was available. So they came up with 9 different parcels that were to be surveyed if in fact they sold as those parcels. So bidders could come and they could bid on any of the individual parcels. They could bid on the whole area. They had any kind of combination of possibilities. And this method of auction, if you haven't ever been to one, there's sort of a big board that kind of shows you what the leading bid is on all the different parcels, and it moves rather quickly. And if you want to get the best price on the whole thing, you tend to need to buy the whole thing. And so it's definitely a way to get the seller the highest price that they're going to be able to get. Why was this property so important that we scrambled in a month? It has long been a part of the Jacoby Greenbelt. That has been, Brian alluded to it, a long-held plan of the Village of Yellow Springs to buffer the village with a greenbelt. The first part of that endeavor really was called the Country Common, the idea that along Glen Helen and John Bryan Nature Preserve, they would use conservation easements to kind of buffer those natural areas so that they wouldn't have a housing development right up next to a nature preserve with all kinds of people doing their own thing on the nature preserve property, as neighbors sometimes do. Then they kind of began to take in the Jacoby Creek on the western side of the village as a conservation priority. And then in 1977, they completed the targeted area all the way around the village. So they added on the northern side as well the areas that they wanted to protect. And that included Whitehall Farm, which was really pivotal as far as our land trust activity. That went to auction in 34 pieces in 1999 and was in fact all preserved. We were able to succeed at that. So we had, after the auction, been able to really work fast and furious with lots of different government resources to purchase easements, and then also had donated easements from many families. But we found ourselves once again in a situation where we had an auction and had to move pretty quickly. We have David, you can come in here if you want. Come on down. Because I'd like to show these maps if I could. And I don't know what happened exactly. So basically then we had to move quickly. We called a land trust after I heard from Matt Arnovitz on February 16th. We got together with the Yellow Springs Village Council on February 21st. Checked in with them on whether this was still a priority for them, and they said, oh yeah, it is. Western side of the village, with a lot of development coming from Beaver Creek. We do want to try to protect those properties in that western part of the Greenbelt. So that was a good sign, because they're an important funding partner of ours. We reached out to the Yellow Springs News right away, and they published information right away about what was going on with this property and with this auction. So we had February 23rd an article in the Yellow Springs News, which for those of you not from Yellow Springs, that's a newspaper that still really seems to carry a lot of weight in these parts. It's really something that is important for us to keep up with. We then had a walk. Our land trust board has to walk every property that they consider protecting. And that might seem odd if you're working in a fairly small area, and definitely this is a property that people have had their eyes on for a while. But interestingly enough, it's a real important thing to do, not just to see the land, but also to walk around with the landowner or the farmer, or in this case also the auctioneer. So we were able to get that set up, and the board then was able to make an informed decision about how to proceed from there. We had on February 25th, it was a Saturday, our boardwalk in the morning. In the afternoon, I came to a community solutions, thank you, I came to a community solutions conference in this very room. Saul Greenberg, one of the community solutions board members, had just texted me and called me and really wanted me to get here to talk about this real threat, in a way, you know, to the village and to this green belt that had been proposed, and to our water resources, honestly. And so I thought, oh boy, if I were Susan Jennings, I wouldn't really want anybody to butt in on my conference today, probably. But Susan was very gracious, and Saul really wanted me here. And so I said a little bit in the afternoon about what was going on with this property. And people said, what can we do? The audience was really moved about this and concerned about this. And I said, well, you could bid. And so that was really where the seed was planted. And people started to think about doing that, maybe in groups, not a clear direction at first, but Susan will talk a little bit about how that unfolded as well. I'm going to just back you up here to, other way, to the maps. All right, okay. Okay, this is landowners having choices, okay? That was that slide. This was the parcels for the auction, and so you can see how those 9 parcels are divided up. So they were really trying to maximize that little bit of road frontage and right-of-way that they have on Dayton Yellow Springs Road that runs east to west there, and then on Houston Road that runs north to south. And then this is the green belt area that the green areas of which were protected at the time of the auction, and the yellow property is the Arnemitz property. And then the intervening properties also were a targeted part of the green belt. So that map had long been established. Whitehall Farm's a part of that block to the north. So that was a picture that people had in mind. And honestly, sort of like the Glen Helen project, they really kind of felt like it was protected already, you know, because they'd seen that map so many times. So it was something that really struck a responsive chord, really to an extent that surprised me. And then this is the map when, at the point in 1977 when the village approved that the open space plan that included that whole swath all the way around Yellow Springs. So here we are at the conference, and got a lot of people interested, and then a couple days later, Tecumseh Land Trust had its board meeting, and the board approved to proceed on this as a project. That we had people who split up into different groups to help with different parts. Folks that would help with some of the educational activities, with communication and negotiation with the village, knowing that their green space fund was probably really an important thing for us to have as a possibility to work with. And our board also committed the 1% for green space funds that we have. And that's kind of a local program that businesses volunteer to participate in, with a 1% surcharge that's voluntary. But at the point at which this land came for auction, we had $22,000 in that fund. And so the board said, absolutely, this is a great thing for that, and go ahead and raise more money too. So we set about figuring out how to do that. So February 28th, the calls started. I don't know if I got Devin that day or who all I got that day, but a lot of the people who are now partners on this bigger project are folks that we reached out to for help. We just felt like it would be a bad thing to leave any stones unturned. You know, we really wanted to see who might be available that would have some resources or potentially be a buyer of some or all of the land. So we got to work reaching out and also setting up a fair number of dates for meetings. On March 4th, we had a community organizing meeting at village headquarters, and we divided up after kind of an overview and some look at maps. We talked then in small work groups about the bidding process and what kind of education we needed to get out to potential bidders, fundraising, and then what the conservation values are of this property. I think Nadia Malarkey was one of the people in that group who's going to be a speaker tomorrow, because we wanted to really make sure that everyone was aware of how important it really was for the watershed. Then we had our already scheduled Sugar Shack event on March 5th. It was a balmy day, more than the March 3rd event was this year. But it was a great opportunity, again, for people to look at maps and just kind of network about what was going on. March 6th then, Village Council had an executive session before their regular session. One of the things we talked about was, should we bid? Should the village and the land trust, in some configuration, look at bidding on the land? Because that's the surest way to get control of the land, is actually to buy it. And the decision was at that point, that would be a lot of money. It's hard to tell how much it would be because it's an auction. And so no, we would really rather work with bidders and raise money to pay for conservation easements that could go to the bidders who would agree to protect the land once they bought it at the auction. So that was the model that we followed. The village committed all of their $200,000 of green space funds that were available. And the other thing that they did was they decided not to annex the eastern 80-acre parcel of the Arnovitz property that was adjacent to the high school and adjacent to village services, to village utilities. And so that was really a big decision and an important decision in terms of who would be bidding on the property. And so they made that decision. There's some land on the other side of Dayton Yellow Springs Road, the north side, the Business and Education Park that the village has been working on trying to develop for some time. So that's really been a major development goal of theirs. They've looked more for infill type housing. And one of the sites they're working on is actually a village-owned glass farm property, and that progress continues, looking at housing possibilities on that property. So they made that decision, and again, that made it much less likely that people who wanted to develop that parcel would bid on it. We had a bidders open house on March 7th. We had the auctioneers here. They were a little afraid of coming to Yellow Springs, I gotta say, but we were pretty well behaved, and we wanted people to have a chance to understand how this bidding process worked if they hadn't been through it before. We had a really nice turnout, and the auctioneers were on hand to show us what the big screen looks like as you go through that bidding process. And it was terrific. And we actually did sort of some fake bidding, to kind of see how that software works. And that was a lot of fun, actually. Really good night. And definitely at that point, I think Community Solutions was gearing up to bid. And then we had a bidders open house, a series of bidders open houses at the Land Trust, just to try to make ourselves real accessible to people who might want to bid, to talk about if they wanted to work with us with this growing pot of money that we were trying to raise. What would a conservation easement look like? Would they want to try to have our participation financially in their purchase of this property, with the follow-up being to conserve it. We put the bidding open houses at different times of the day, so 8 to 10 a.m. on the 9th. March 9th, we had actually a second walk with the Nature Conservancy and the County Park District. Looked like this might just be a good restoration project, and it was a very rainy day. By the way, the boardwalk was a very snowy day, so it was March. We then had a pretty key executive committee meeting on March 13th. We'd really played around with numbers a lot at that point, had some ideas about what did it look like different parcels might go for, who did we think that we knew of might be bidders on some of those different parcels, and a range of numbers at that point we might be looking at. Another bidders open house, different time. By March 15th, we had $375,000 available, either pledged or on hand, to work with the winning bidders at the auction. And then on March 16th, we had the auction, and we were ready to give an option to purchase agreement to any bidders that wanted to consider the funding available. We divided it up per acre. It was around $1,400 an acre that was available, with the $357,000. We, that very night, shopped around with all the bidders that we knew were there. We tried to meet people that we didn't know, just to let them know kind of what we were offering. And then the action started. So now we'll step back a little bit here for Susan.
So I didn't know that whole story, and it's reminding me a little bit of those films where you have the one spouse or partner talking about, how did I get to this?
Yeah.
How did I get to this part? Now I'm going to tell the other partner's story. I'm not going to start in 1940, except to let people know that we actually are an organization that is celebrating our 78th birthday. We were founded by Arthur Morgan, who many of you may know is actually the founder of Community Land Trust. And the organization, or people who have run the organization, have founded some of the oldest land trusts in the country. So this, even though this is sort of a surprise purchase for us, we have a little bit of a history of land trusts. So the organization in that time frame has gone through a number of iterations, and most recently we had a really lengthy strategic planning process with our board and staff. And the 5 areas on the right-hand side were our 5 strategic foci, and the reason I put them up is because in addition to the idea of a land trust, we feel that the purchase of the property has really enabled us to sort of actualize all the different pieces of our organizational mission, including community economics, regenerative land use, not yet energy democracy, although we're hoping to do a solar array on the farm, and also community resilience, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the regenerative land use piece of our mission was our most keen, or has been our most keen interest for about 1.5 years. And the reason for that, and I don't know, I don't want to necessarily say a lot about soil, but I guess I was going to ask people to raise their hands about how much they knew about soil, but let me just give you the overview, and then if you're interested, not only do we have tomorrow focused on soil, but we have a number of really, if you become a soil geek, we have a lot of great opportunities coming up for you to really celebrate with other soil geeks. But the reason that we became very interested in soil as an organization is over the last really only a few years, maybe 5 years, soil's become a really key part of the international climate conversation. And the reason is, if you pay any attention to climate conversations, there's a lot of despair going around because there's been so much carbon put in the atmosphere that it's, even if we suddenly turned off all the lights and stopped driving cars, there's just an awful lot of carbon already in the atmosphere that's just going to continue to force heat. Where land use comes into this is that the way historically we've been farming and deforestation and other forest issues, we've been not only putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, but we've been making it difficult for our land to actually sequester carbon. And our land is actually the largest terrestrial sink of carbon. So it's a huge terrestrial sink. And what's been happening again, and in addition to climate scientists really focusing on soil, there's been a lot of new research out of the Rodale Institute and many other land use institutes, but essentially their calculations are that if we start regenerating soil and using regenerative land use practices internationally, that we can not only sequester current carbon emissions, but also start to chip away at historical carbon. So this is very exciting news, and there's not that many people who are talking about it. So as a very small organization who happen to have some science geeks as part of the board, we felt that regenerative land use was actually something that we could spend our time on that would be well worth it in terms of education and research. And this is, by the way, Peter Bain is going to speak tomorrow. He was a board member at the time of, before our purchase. And this is a slide from his presentation last year. He'll be here tomorrow, talking a little bit about the possibilities for regeneration internationally. So now I'm joining the timeline. The Soils Conference last year was our first Soils Conference. It was very exciting, especially if you were a soil geek. As Kat Walter, one of our board members, said, that listening to David Brandt, who's a carbon farmer, and Peter Bain talk was like soil porn, and it really was. It was very, very exciting if you're interested in soil. So we're all getting like really excited in our 2-day conference, thinking we really need to do an on-the-ground project. Maybe there's an acre or two that we could like convince somebody to let us do some research on. And then Krista came, as she mentioned, to talk about this farm going up to auction. And honestly, it was the last thing in my mind that this was something that we could be bidding on. It was just not even in the. It's just not there at all. So it was not love at first sight. But I was walking in Yellow Springs. I think I was going to lunch at Current Cuisine, and I ran into one of our members, and she said to me, "I think you should bid, and if you bid, I'll put $100,000 into the pot." So this was a real. It wasn't really a challenge. I think the whole process. I mean, we've certainly gone through a lot of like. Stress and terror over the last year, I'll say, as a board and staff, because this is this is by far the largest project we've ever taken on. But at that point, when I was speaking to the member, we just decided, let's just play with this. Let's just take the next step, see what happens. Let's not stress about it. And what happened was, I have this amazing board who, despite the fact of having a fairly low balance in our checkbook, said, let's go for it. So that was very exciting. And this is where, again, the individual and the community leadership comes to play. And also, by the way, I'm not sure where to mention it, but Lori Kuhn, who runs the Morgan Family Foundation, also convenes a bi-monthly group of nonprofit leaders. And from 3 hours away, drive over with a check the night before we had to close, and said, friends helped us buy our land many years ago, and we really want to be here to help you buy your land. So it was just an extraordinary time. And here's some of our staff at Agraria at the beautiful barn. And sad that we are not at the barn. Sadly, it's a little chilly there to have it, but have the conference here. But I hope that people will come out and have a walk on Agraria. So just, this is not about Agraria per se. Tomorrow we'll learn a little bit more, but I just wanted to tell you that all this faith and all these contributions have wrought. In the upper left-hand corner is a shot inside our barn last May. After we closed on the property, we had a charrette, and all kinds of people came to talk about what we might do on the farm. Over the last year, well, really more like 6 months, we've had lots and lots of focus group dinners on the barn, meetings with farmers, meetings with educators. We've traveled a lot, went to the Land Institute, all different places to kind of get a sense of what's happening nationally in this regenerative agriculture space. And I should say, and again, you'll hear more tomorrow if you come, but the idea of regenerative land use, which I'm sure most of you know, really has to do with keeping soil covered all year round, thinking about the different mix of crops that you put in, specific, and especially perennials, and then basically getting organic matter on top of the soil and in the soil. So this is a conceptual map of some of our plans for Agraria. I'll just talk about the three main pieces. Devin Schenk, who's here from the Nature Conservancy, who's an important partner that Krista brought to the table. We're going to be doing a remeandering of Jacoby Creek. You can sort of see it as an S-curve in the middle of the map. And there's going to be restoration going on there. As part of the restoration project, we are doing serious soil and water research into what the state of the land which has been farmed. What's the right word? Conventionally, thank you. In corn and soy. The first thing that we did actually was take a lot of soil tests, and then we put the land in cover crops and let it rest while we had our deliberations. The other big partnerships that we have going on, one is with the Yellow Spring Schools and the Greene County Career Center. We're working on developing a high school ag program for Yellow Spring students and Greene County career students. We're also working with a number of neighboring colleges and universities, including Antioch and Central State, on research projects. And then the other really interesting piece, and this comes out of there's not a one solution answer to that problem, but there's a lot of small pieces of the solution, which include aggregation, it includes land access for organic farmers, and it includes distribution. So those are all issues that we have been in conversation with local farmers about, and now for the first time also we're able to offer land to local organic farmers. We put out an RFP for about basically the other half of the land that's not being part of the Nature Conservancy regeneration, and within a month we had 4 amazing proposals for heritage grains, organic corn and soy, a therapy space, and a biodynamic research space. So we're pretty excited about all the things that are going to happen there. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sandy. Is that right? Did you want to?
Yeah, I didn't really know Sandy very well until recently, but just want to say community credit unions are a great resource in many ways that I didn't understand, and Sandy's going to fill you in on how they are related to this particular situation, and also has ideas about other things that they can do to help too. And I'll get your handouts out. Is that good?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that
Okay.
I do have handouts available if you want to pick them up afterwards or pass them while you're going. They primarily give some details of the type of loan and also about credit unions and why the credit union was able to step in and help with the project. And following up with Susan and Krista, partnership is the key to everything that happened in this particular case, and I'm focusing specifically on Agraria for the information that I'm providing, and that first and foremost, time was of the essence, and to pursue any kind of conventional financing for them really would have been out of the question. You know, by the time you look at all of the time that goes into doing the application and the surveying and all of the process to get from an application to approval and providing all of the paperwork and the red tape, and the time that it would have taken even for an individual to make a purchase with a nonprofit or an organization to go through. Again, it just wasn't practical. I don't know that it could have happened. But again, with partnership, knowing that there were an incredible amount of people in the village who were supportive to this kind of a project, as well as some conversations that had come forward about impact investing and how can I invest in a community and know that my dollars are going to be returning something locally. Those things were all just conversations that had been circulating. And so, again, with partnership, we were able to come forward and utilize the interested parties willing to put forward a deposit, put the funds on deposit at the credit union to secure the loan to Community Solutions. What that did, that allowed us to use a revolving loan line of credit that was available instantly. As soon as the shares were on deposit, they were pledged as collateral for the loan, and then as soon as Community Solutions signed for the loan, that money was available instantly, up to the maximum amount that they needed, and could be drawn upon at various times as well as afterwards as the loans paid down. So again, with the partnership, we were able to, as soon as the deposits came in, and of course there was a legal process, probably an 8-page form that the depositors needed to sign and everything else, but other than that, it was a very quick process on our end. I think the benefits for that, again, because we were local and we have an investment in what's going on with these projects, we were able to get a rate out there and to minimize the risk with the share deposits, that we could offer a rate that was nowhere near what it would have been had this loan had to go somewhere else. So that part of it was a win-win as far as being able to step forward and say, here's a solution for the time, but that was dependent again on having other folks in the community willing to invest. And at the same time, the investors are earning a return at what the normal rate of return would be on the product that they selected at the credit union. So when they came into the credit union to put the funds on deposit, they could choose a certificate, or they could choose a money market or a regular share, whatever they wanted to do with their deposit. The deposit is still in their name, it's still owned by them, it's still insured 100% by the NCUA for them individually, the commitment that they're making, and again, they're still earning the rate of return on their deposit. The difference is that they're minimizing the risk because they're pledging that as collateral for the loan instead of utilizing a mortgage. Again, the loan rate, the loan terms, everything fell together. As far as we were concerned, the amount we were able to do too. We have to watch that a little bit because we're a tiny credit union. And so, we don't have the funds available immediately that some of the larger banks do. So again, that worked for us in terms of the amount of loan. And I know there's a time on this, on the discussion here a little bit later that I'll talk about more about the impact of that and what some of the other solutions are for that issue. But again, immediately, for this immediate loan, it was all because of partnership. And again, the value, it was kind of a win-win for everybody involved. It's a win-win for the credit union because that's what credit unions are supposed to be doing. That's why they're different from a bank. And a credit union is not for profit, not for charity, but for service. And some credit unions demonstrate that more than others. And ours is interested in being very engaged in the community and doing whatever we can to help, because we know that that's why we're in business as opposed to a bank who's looking to earn money for the shareholders. But it's challenging to find different ways, and without other people and organizations in the community recognizing that and valuing that, it's very hard to find the opportunities to do that. So again, we were really pleased to be able to help. It fulfilled our mission. It helped the borrower in that we feel like we got a good loan product for them. It was quick and able to meet their needs at the time that they needed it. The pricing is good for the product. The investors, again, we provided an avenue where some investors who were looking to put their money somewhere where not just getting the rate of return, but that they know that the benefit is buying something for the betterment of the community. So again, we just think it was a win-win for all, and certainly there's details are on here, but if anybody wants to catch me anytime or call me or ask any questions further about details, I've included my contact information on there too.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So I am going to transition a little bit then to the partnership. And then we are gonna get Sandy back at the end to just say a little bit more about community investment possibilities through credit unions. And we're gonna have John Gaduli at the end of the day also, or later today, talking about, I think he has the last session, impact investing from a foundation perspective. And they've done a lot of impact investing in terms of really urban redevelopment, which is kind of the flip side of the coin, I think, to what we do in terms of our conservation work. So it's very exciting to see these local possibilities to me. We were just really taken aback by all the enthusiasm from the community. We got $137,000 of donations and pledges on top of the village's commitment, on top of the 1% funds. Community Solutions was able to come up with all this tremendous support to be able to make the purchase of the biggest part of the land. And so I felt like, wow, we need to not let this go. This plan has been on the books for a long time to preserve this Jacoby Greenbelt. Land is getting more expensive. It's not going to get easier to preserve. I've been looking at these regional conservation partnerships out of the conservation portion of the Farm Bill for some period of time. We use a lot of easement purchase monies out of the Farm Bill, but we really hadn't gone for this at this point yet. In fact, we'd really sort of been looking at another watershed as the first one that we might want to pursue this. It's not really a grant program because it's a partnership that includes a lot of partner commitment dollars along with the dollars that are available from the federal government. But it seemed like, what the heck? Started talking pretty much right after the auction about what the timeline was for this project, and lo and behold, the deadline was 2 months earlier than I thought it was going to be. So we started crunching on that, and our goal was to improve water quality in the sub-watersheds of the Little Miami, the Jacoby sub-watershed to the west of Yellow Springs, and the Yellow Springs Creek to the east. We included EQIP dollars, Environmental Quality Improvement Program dollars, which can install conservation practices on the land. All kinds of things, cover crops, filter strip plantings, all kinds of things are possible that will do drainage in the best way for conservation, that will enhance the habitat. So we thought, boy, this is a great opportunity not only to preserve this land, but actually to improve conservation practices and demonstrate that. You know, I think a lot of times I say 20 miles is as far as news spreads. You know, if somebody puts an easement on their property, if you're 20 miles away from it, you may well hear about that, you know, especially if you're sort of established in the community. But you have to have kind of local knowledge, local experience really make a difference. And I don't think our areas designated for this project have been big users of EQIP funds actually in the past. But our hope would be that by having a concentrated amount of funding for a concentrated amount of time, that we will get some participation in those multiple possible options through EQIP. And so Lane and Lee are here today from NRCS and our Soil and Water District, so they're very involved partners on that. And then we also are looking for funding for conservation easement purchase in the watershed. And so then this became kind of our key map as far as the high priority properties for preservation. And then I don't have a slide of the greater sub-watershed map that Lane put together for us, but it's on our display board out in the lobby. So we have just about 26,000 acres that will be eligible for these programs. But we definitely do hope in terms of the conservation easement protection to prioritize those properties that are in red in particular. We again reached out to a lot of the people we had contacted about potential resources for preserving the Arnovitz property, and a lot of those organizations ended up becoming partners on the project. Very important relationship with Soil and Water and NRCS. We have YSI Xylem here in Yellow Springs that manufactures water quality testing equipment that is sold all over the world, and they immediately came up with really our first specific dollar commitment of personnel, expertise, and equipment to do water quality monitoring over 5 years. And so that was just very exciting. We reached out to the townships that are affected by the watersheds, Nature Conservancy, that we already had sort of gotten our feet wet, so to speak, with Nature Conservancy and that restoration possibility, Ohio EPA, our Clean Ohio programs, both for agriculture and for open space preservation, Central State, Antioch. Central State had achieved land grant status, and you all may be aware of that, but that's really a critical designation in terms of access to research dollars and a lot of capacity building that only, I think, 130 institutions of higher learning have in the whole country. So that's big news. They are 10 miles down the road. And so again, we'd really been hoping to be able to do some work with them, and are really looking forward to working with them both on research but also technical assistance to farmers and landowners. And then Susan also mentioned the project-based learning model at the Yellow Springs schools is just terrific. The 7th grade curriculum in particular really hits on a lot of ecosystem factors, and so they immediately were also very enthusiastic about signing on as a partner to get those kids involved in the water testing, real hands-on, and also citizen science. We, April 21st, had to have our pre-application done, March 16th auction, April 21st. And so we had to at least have all the partners lined up that said they would want to participate. We, in fact, were invited to do a full proposal, which was then due September 7th. And that required all of our partners to do letters of commitment. And that included what would their contribution be worth in, cash, personnel, supplies. They had to actually put a dollar figure into a letter. And I tell you, working with state agencies, Angela's here from Ohio EPA. I mean, this is a weird request because they really do have to go through their own processes for scoring properties. But the willingness to try to work on this restoration and conservation project in an ag area, very, very heavy ag area, but with great water resources as well, was really exciting to people. There's certain areas that it's really best to leave fallow and not to try to cultivate for the environmental benefits that we get from that. And then there's other areas that are just excellent soils that you really want to be able to have available for agriculture as long as you can. So I just really appreciated that. We got letters from every single partner that we were trying to line up, and that was one of the reasons we were really successful. So we found out about December 21st that we actually had gotten the award a little bit less than what we'd hoped to, and we're still kind of negotiating the final numbers, but I think we're coming along on that. And when I say still, I will be working on that a little bit tonight, so it's a work in progress. This summer and fall, we're going to be doing a good bit of landowner outreach, letting people know kind of what would be available through the EQUIP program, through conservation easement potential, but also just other resources for landowners, because we have a lot of landowners in this area who are not themselves farmers, and so they are not very familiar really with the Farm Bill programs. So we really want to try to provide a lot of potential resource connections, and honestly including financial planning, estate planning, an awful lot of people kick the can down the road on what's going to happen with that land, and it's going to, if you don't plan for it, it's going to turn over and there won't be a plan, and your heirs will just get to have to figure that out, at the time. And so we really like it if people do good planning and have a broad idea of what the possibilities are for them in terms of right now how they manage their land, but also in terms of future possibilities. And then we would expect by early 19 we'd actually be working on property-specific applications for conservation practices through EQIP and also for easement purchase applications. That is the end of my portion, but I want to invite Sandy back here just to talk a little bit more about some of the possibilities she's working on from the credit union end of things, investing in local businesses and projects.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, one of the drawbacks for us is our size, our small size. That we're just kind of a speck compared to the big, large banks and what they can do in terms of, both on the investing side and on the lending side. But let me first back up and give you a little bit of just a brief summary of why the credit union's a little bit different and what we pride ourselves in on what we kind of call the philosophy of our credit union. And a little bit about my background. First of all, this is my 31st year working in the credit union industry, and I started out in 1987 at a credit union in Cincinnati, and I worked there for 17 years, and I was the vice president to a CEO who was named Bill Herring, and if any of you ever read any history books about how credit unions started, you'll see a name in there, Louise McCarran Herring, and she was given the nickname of Mother of Credit Unions. And back in the 40s, she literally traveled around the United States and helped to start the chartering process for numerous credit unions, and eventually came back to Ohio and was responsible for setting up the chapter of CUNA, our Ohio Credit Union League, and was on that board for a long time. And she had a son and a daughter, Bill Herring, who was the CEO at the credit union that I worked for, and his sister leased a quarter of our building for a second credit union that she started for the communicating arts. And so anyway, for my first 17 years in the business, I had no choice but to just absorb the whole philosophy of credit unions and who we are and why we are and where we came from and what's our purpose to exist. And one of the most interesting projects that I had at the time was bringing financial services back to the Over the Rhine neighborhood that had been debanked for 7 years. We actually, and to do that at the same time as being able to not jeopardize with undue risk and so forth, or drain resources of the credit union that had already built up. We had 22,000 members we served, and the credit union had been in business since the 1940s. And so that was quite a challenge because we're not for profit, so we didn't have just coffers of funds that we could use to bring up this debanked area with the quality of service that it needed. So anyway, through that process, I learned a lot, and we were successfully able to do that. And it's still open today, and the credit union is still vibrant today. And the reason I'm not still there is I was, we'll say, recruited to a credit union 3 years before I came here. And it was kind of a situation where even my boss at the time, even Bill, was supportive of my going. He said, that to me, it's not an insult that you're leaving my employment. It's an honor to me that we can send you out and begin to do more in different places, because there aren't enough credit unions that are truly engaged in community. So that's a little bit of history of why I'm here, and it's just been incredible to see these kinds of things happening in this area. It's just really exciting. But again, the difference between the credit union, we kind of talked about that already, and that we're not for profit. We have volunteer leadership, so our board of directors, they're all volunteer, they're all community oriented. And again, our purpose and our mission is to enhance people's lives through quality financial products, services, education, and community. So again, we are a little bit restricted, so how do we be able to find ways to do more of this with our restriction on our size? So one thing we did last year was we received our CDFI designation, which is Community Development Financial Institution, and we had to go through a series of testing and so forth to prove that we were community-minded and interested in serving the community and in an area that could benefit from those kind of services. And what that's going to do for us is, in time, it simply opens up more resources for us to look to, whether it's applying for grants to help with specific things or additional networking, consultation, and just helping us to find creative ways to be able to do more things with additional resources. One such example is trying to partner with other credit unions who are similarly minded in their philosophy. And if we can still maintain the service and provide the products and solutions that we want and that are needed in our community, can we have kind of a silent partner on the financial statement side of things that could come in and provide some of the, if it's a loan, for example, maybe it's an amount of loan dollars that we can't put on our financials right now. Maybe we look at what is feasible for us to do, and the silent partner then is an investor to our credit union, if you will, and provides that other funding, and we're still the face and the understanding partner within the community who can determine what needs to happen, what the product needs to look like, make sure that it's better than market priced, and that we're the ones who are there to answer to collect the payments or collect the deposits or provide the education or whatever pieces are necessary for those things to happen. So we're in process. It's all a work in process. So, but we were real happy to get the CDFI designation last year. That's not easy for a lot of credit unions to be able to receive that. So we're on the right path, and this was just very rewarding to be able to do something. Before we have all those other things in place, there are still things that we can do to be of help. So there's some information on the handout on the other side of the Agraria loan product information that summarizes a little bit about that.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we got a little bit of time for questions here. I think we got plenty of mics here. So anything we didn't cover there, Mr. Partee?
Sandy, someone comes to you, conservation-minded person, $100,000 for a particular project, in this case. What are the risks to that person, financial risks, and what are the risks to the credit union? The whole process of making this project successful, hopefully making it successful.
The risk to the investor is that the loan does not get repaid properly. It goes into default, and part of their investment has to go to repay the loan. So as an investor, there's a lot of risk there. The risk, though, is dependent on the quality of the borrower. So, we limit that as much as possible, and we play as much a part as we can in evaluating what that looks like, as well as they prior to coming to us, have been in contact and aware fully of what the project is. So the investor has an opportunity to clearly make that decision if they're okay with that risk. The risk to the credit union is that it would be if there's any chance that those funds that are being held for collateral would be withdrawn for any reason. Let's say our system doesn't properly withhold it and we have an uninformed teller and we have someone that's not honest and comes in from that organization attempting to withdraw those funds that are meant to be, or from the private investor, attempting to withdraw those funds that are supposed to be held. That's a risk. It's very low risk. But the other risk to us up front was making sure we had the right commitment, the right collateral pledge, and I talked about that 8-page document that the investors sign. And again, that was really important to us. We want to make sure that everything's right up front and forthright in every step of the process. And so had we not invested in the legal cost and expertise to get the right information up front for the contract, that could have been a risk to the credit union.
Does the land, in purchasing land, for example, for the conservation easement, also, if they still apply, purchasing land, can the land that's being purchased serve as collateral?
Yeah, I did want, one thing that I didn't mention is that in addition to the contract that people signed with the credit union, we also have an agreement with all our investors that will repay them within 2 years. And our process will be going through a capital campaign and then getting the mortgage on the property, on whatever's left of the money that we owe. But then we also wrote a mortgage. Did I say that? We wrote a mortgage as part of that agreement. So essentially, we have a 2-year mortgage with the land as collateral. So it's sort of a 2-step process.
I was going to mention that as well too. We have our draft written up, and we can do it both ways. I've actually made another loan prior to this at the credit union I was at before, and we cut off between the credit union. Our agreement was that there is no mortgage involved as far, the credit union is an agreement solely between the investor and the credit union. But then there can be secondary agreements beyond that, which normally a typical note, I'm getting technical here, but normally when someone borrows funds from the credit union, they agree that there are no other outside arrangements that have anything to do with this financing agreement. They're signing with us. This program is different in that it does acknowledge that those, whatever the peripheral arrangements might be, can exist. And so there was an agreement. We did a project before where there was a secondary agreement, but again, the credit union was not involved. However, there was a mortgage written which then protected the investors, and it said that if for some reason the organization defaulted on the loan, before their shares would be taken, there would be X amount of time allowed for a foreclosure process. So there are steps you can take beyond that initial agreement to protect the investor too. That was a good question. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering what the general feedback was of the township and the county governments that you reached out to.
They didn't offer any money. They didn't. And not to be negative though either, in that we've had some participation from counties and from townships in the past. Miami Township in particular. When there were more local government funds and when we had Ohio estate taxes, Miami Township actually dedicated quite a few dollars. I would say probably, I don't know, $300,000, something like that over the years to match for conservation easements. And they would put the state tax monies that came back to them up to the level of $100,000 into an account for farmland preservation. So that was great. But yeah, we didn't, and Xenia was not super compelled about the Jacoby Creek having a lot of impact on their wellhead, but at any rate, we did reach out, and I just generally speaking, just to say, with easements that we purchase, we have to get resolutions of support from those government units, and so generally speaking, we do a lot of due diligence with them to make sure that we're not interfering with development plans that they have, or setting up something that's going to, somehow butt heads between development and conservation. So generally they are regular partners of ours, but in this instance they have a lot to bring to the table. Other questions? Yes?
Could we have the people with questions speak into a mic, please?
That's possible, yeah. There's the Antioch mic that can be thrown about the room, encased in foam, and then there's another mic that we can just deliver by hand. So another question, we'll get you a mic. Okay, well, I think let's have a round of applause for this panel here.